The word narcissist would have to be one of the most misused and taken out of context terms that I've ever seen. Too often, people with a healthy level of narcissism are falsely labelled as pathological narcissists. And if someone calls you a narcissist and they don't know you from a bar of soap, that just indicates how ignorant they are about the subject. So in this video, I want to offer you some more insights that could possibly offer you more clarity. First of all, only a qualified mental health professional can give an official diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. The rest of us are just identifying a patient based on our limited understanding, very subjective observation, and personal experience. But you might ask, isn't me feeling crazy my entire life, enduring years or decades of extremely dysfunctional behavior at the hands of a person who intentionally distorts, justifies, and normalizes their abuse? Isn't that enough? And why are so many people turning to the internet to find answers? Have mental health professionals really got a grasp on this? Is just reading about it in a textbook enough to truly understand how dangerous this behavior is if it's not recognized sooner? The problem with receiving an official diagnosis is that mental health professionals are trying to diagnose a condition that's based on convincingly lying about who this person is. Another thing that I really like to point out is that I am not an expert in this area, but I just have a deep passion for this subject because it impacted my life in such a devastating way, mostly unbeknownst to me at the time. But let's just say that I survived a type of hell that I wouldn't wish upon anybody. Everything that I learned about this subject literally saved my life. But I had to make this video because the word narcissist is thrown around by everybody online, and it's just becoming ridiculous because a lot of people have a very limited understanding of this psychopathology. It's recognized as a personality disorder, a mental pathology meaning disease. I also believe it's a psycho-spiritual affliction, and that is why psychiatry, psychology has been very limited in their ability to identify this, let alone cure it. But that's entirely another subject for another video. So as usual, I really love to amplify the clarity on this subject to clear up as much of the confusion as possible and offer you some information about how a real professional diagnosis is made, what it's based on, and what's necessary to meet the criteria to warrant this diagnosis. I just need to clarify something straight off the bat. Everyone seems to think that a narcissist is every person who is selfish, inconsiderate, who gave them the cold shoulder or evil eye, someone who's got a massive ego, who's opinionated and needs a lot of attention. And what's wrong with this word being thrown about interchangeably is that it waters down the real meaning of what a pathological narcissist actually is. And I'll go into details in this video so you can have an even deeper understanding. If you've truly experienced a relationship with a pathological narcissist, you would have experienced psychological, emotional, financial, spiritual, physical, and/or sexual abuse. This one relationship would have had such a profound impact on your life that it shatters your sense of self-worth. Narcissism is quite a generic term, so mental health professionals have used numerous subcategories to offer us even more understanding. You may have heard of terms like high-functioning narcissism, or you may have also heard of cerebral or somatic, and there are numerous subcategories that all have relevance and offer even greater insights into this very confusing psychopathology. Researchers in this area also use psychological evaluation tools to help assess where on the spectrum a patient might be. Tests such as the NPI, the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, is a popular narcissism assessment. Also the Narcissism Spectrum Scale, the NSS, but there are problems with these tests that try to measure how narcissistic someone actually is. And I won't go into details about these in this video. There are no lab tests, no blood tests or genetic testing used to diagnose a personality disorder. And again, the biggest problem is that most people with this disorder don't seek treatment. Diagnosing someone involves careful interviewing and/or use of these standardized questionnaires to obtain information, and the focus is on trying to identify long-term patterns of thinking, behaving, interacting, feeling that actually cause ongoing distress in this person's life. They also need to rule out other mental health disorders, physical illnesses, so a thorough medical history needs to be taken to rule out any other possible health problems that could be a cause of these symptoms. We cannot possibly just assume that every person who frequently displays narcissistic traits or behaves selfishly, that they actually have a personality disorder. It is not as simple as that. I mean, how much time did it take you to even realize the toxicity of the behavior of the person that you now identify as a pathological narcissist? How long did it take you to connect the dots on the destruction that they leave behind? So you can imagine how difficult it would be for a mental health professional to actually make this diagnosis. This diagnosis is difficult for even trained professionals, and it takes comprehensive testing for someone to receive an official diagnosis, which, let me tell you, by what I see online, rarely happens. In fact, victims of narcissistic abuse are crying out for validation of the trauma that they've experienced. Unfortunately, most of us who have endured narcissistic abuse were mistreated by a person who will probably never be diagnosed, and that's a big part of the problem. We continue feeling crazy because psychology can't or won't validate our experiences. In fact, I think it's pretty fair to say that most mental health professionals don't quite understand narcissistic abuse unless they've experienced it themselves. And a question that comes to mind is, at what point does someone's behavior become pathological? A true pathological narcissist will gradually erode your will to live. It's like having a malignant cancer that's slowly eating away at your soul, at your vitality, at your resources. So I'm not talking about narcissistic traits. I'm not talking about a mood or a phase. And we all experience issues with behaviour to one degree or another. But for our behaviour to warrant a diagnosis, these behaviours need to significantly and persistently impair our ability to function socially, interpersonally, and occupationally. So this is going to be another really detailed video. I thought it was really important to share with you what defines a mental health professional's diagnosis. The Diagnostic Criteria, as defined by the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the Bible of Psychiatry, this guidebook guides mental health professionals to define whether the person meets the criteria for a disorder. And for a diagnosis to be made, a person needs to meet 5 out of 9 criteria for NPD. And this information is available for anyone to look up for themselves. And I always encourage you to do your own research because I have my own slant on this information. So you need to go out there and look this up for yourself and put it in the context that's relevant for you and your situation. The psychology of narcissism is definitely a complex topic. Narcissistic behaviors exist on a spectrum, on a continuum, and there are many variations that an individual can display. So it's not as simple as labeling someone as a narcissist. And it's becoming apparent online that many people are just labeling all abusers narcissists. There are many reasons why a person may be behaving in an abusive manner. Narcissism is just one label that people are using to define an abuser. And it's understandable because all narcissists are abusive. NPD is called a cluster B personality disorder. So a person suffering from a cluster B personality disorder often struggles to regulate their feelings, and they are usually over emotional and very unpredictable and can display behavioral patterns that we see as erratic, dramatic, even threatening, and very disturbing. And if you're still trying to make sense of a particular person in your life, I suggest that you get familiar with the other personality disorders in Cluster B, because it's been my experience and my observation in that it is very rare that you can just put one personality in Cluster B in a clearly defined box. For example, in my experience, I noticed a lot of psychopathic antisocial behaviors intertwined with mostly narcissistic. And then there are many other cases where a person may be displaying mostly narcissistic behaviors, but there's also a lot of histrionic behavior that is going on there as well. So it's quite complicated and every situation is different. Learning about the other personality disorders neighboring in Cluster B will give you a much greater perspective and a context in which to put all these odd behaviors in. So these people have very impaired relationships. They are incapable of intimacy and find it very difficult to maintain long-term relationships. People with personality disorders have difficulty not only understanding themselves, but also relating to other people. And for a diagnosis to be made, the symptoms have to cause day-to-day problems with their functioning. Their behavior will cause a lot of distress. So it's defined as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. So I'm just going to go back and mention some important points about that first sentence. It's a pervasive pattern, meaning it's prevalent and it's widespread, and their behavior will be noticeable in every area of their life. Another point that jumps out is beginning by early adulthood. So a personality disorder cannot be diagnosed unless you're over 18, with exception of BPD apparently. So these behaviors would have started to show up when they were adolescents, perhaps as children. Another thing to notice is present in a variety of contexts. So again, that indicates that these behaviors infiltrate all areas of their life and they're present in different contexts, such as personal relationships, at work. I think the most apparent one is grandiosity. And that refers to having an unrealistic sense of superiority where they think they are more important, smarter, more beautiful, more amazing than anyone else. So they have a very grandiose sense of self-importance. So you may notice that they over-exaggerate their achievements, their talents, and they actually expect to be recognized as superior. Regardless of whether they have anything to show for it or not, there's an expectation that you should worship them because they are superior and they know it all. This sense of grandiosity makes it impossible for them to ever admit fault, and this is why they deny anything ever wrong with their behavior. And this is why they will never apologize. They simply believe that they are superior to everyone in every way. They won't or can't change because they don't see any problem with themselves. And other things that come to mind regarding this sense of grandiosity is their belief that they are flawless, infallible, or inspiring. This superiority is just a cover for a deep, repressed sense of low self-worth. The truth is that they have a very fragile sense of self. They guard a constructed, fake, pseudo-self and actually depend on others to regulate their self-worth. And this is where many people who have an undifferentiated empathy, where they fall prey to their predatory nature. They will tell us a sob story and we end up feeling pity for them. What they often sell us at this point, and we end up buying, is feel sorry for me because I've been abused. I've had a traumatic childhood, so that makes it okay for me to abuse you. But let's remember that we are each responsible for healing our wounds, working on our own self-esteem. And because of this sense of being superior, they are dismissive of anyone else's input. And there are softer varieties of pathological narcissists. Some are not as grandiose as others. And this is where we need to take into consideration whether this person is extroverted or introverted. Take, for example, the covert and more shy narcissist, who does not display this grandiosity in an exaggerated way. Their form of grandiosity may be more ambient, so it's a little bit more subtle and more difficult to spot. They may display this grandiosity by use of their superior intellect, so it can be expressed in different ways. Another thing to mention is delusions of grandeur, where they believe in their own greatness or how important they are, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. So there's a denial of any weakness. Number 2 is a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. So they're out of touch with reality. There's a lot of magical thinking. There's a distortion of what's real. For example, they may tell others how much they love and adore their children, but the reality is that their adult children have finally gone no contact, because the actual reality is that they were an abusive, violent, and alcoholic parent who neglected their needs. So that's reality, and that's their fantasy. They may captivate you with elaborate stories of how heroic they've been, how selfless they are, or paint a picture of a magnificent future with that idyllic love. Or another example could be when they're afraid that you might leave. So that's when they'll start telling you horrific stories about how hard life is, how bad the world out there is, what's not possible for you. So they pull you into this paranoia. Mostly it's all tragic and terrible outcomes. So this is all under that fantasy and distortion of reality. And I'm not sure if you can relate to this, but when I finally realized how mentally deranged these people were, I was absolutely shocked at how I ever actually believed what they told me. And that's credit to them for being the captivating and alluring storytellers that they are. And on that note, victims of narcissistic abuse often have to develop a strong imagination, and we have to temporarily live in a fantasy land to survive the reality. And many of us may still continue to cling onto some sort of fantasy that they hypnotized us with years ago. Like, one day I will have a great relationship with mummy and daddy. So there's a lot of fantasy and distortion of reality used on both sides. This is why it's so important to become practical, start thinking critically, become more realistic, and objectively and clearly see the discrepancies between the fantasies they've sold you and the reality you deal with on a day-to-day basis. Number 3, they believe that they are special and that they're unique, and they could only be understood by or should only associate with other special or high status people or institutions, because these very special institutions or brilliant, amazing, beautiful people are a reflection of them. Because they truly feel that they are so exceptional, you need to understand that you can never be their equal. They don't have to change. You do. The problem is that you just don't understand them. Only other very unique people can understand them. And that's why they can only associate with a very few select people who appreciate their uniqueness. But they haven't met any of those yet. So they carry this air of disappointment because nobody appreciates how unique they are. Sure, there's rules, but those rules don't apply to them. They're special. And they have a need to keep reminding you of how they are the smartest, how they are just the most brilliant, how they are the best parent. And you need to just accept their criticism and their constant disappointment with you because you're not that special. They over-evaluate themselves and devalue others. And we end up just getting used to never measuring up to their expectations. And this is why in these relationships, our self-worth hits the floor. Because of this specialness, they are incapable of giving compliments or genuine, sincere appreciation. Number 4, requires excessive admiration. So they have a need to constantly be admired, and this is why they always talk about themselves and they expect to be center of attention, because you need to admire them and let them know how fantastic they are and to listen to their every word. They have such a constant need for applause and admiration that you will feel the energy being drained out of you as they talk incessantly about themselves. You will feel exhausted, insane, empty, and very dysregulated. Every topic of conversation will somehow always refer back to them, and they demand your adoration. There is an insatiable need for attention, so they will cause conflict, they will triangulate, gossip, they will use pity plays, sob stories. They say they hate drama, but yet drama seems to follow them everywhere they go. And this is what we fail to understand. Whether it's positive or negative attention, it is still attention. They will do their utmost to remain the center of your life's orbit, and it's all to elicit attention. You may notice, oftentimes, this person has a little fan club of very devoted admirers who glorify them. Regarding the sense of entitlement, they will demand and feel completely entitled to special treatment, and they expect priority service. They feel that they're more deserving than everybody else, and they hold completely unreasonable expectations. So they have a really unrealistic self-appraisal. They'll justify their entitlement by saying, "After everything I've done for you," or "I gave birth to you, so you owe me." So they feel completely entitled to controlling and micromanaging every aspect of your life. They're constantly meddling, obsessively monitoring details of other people's lives. They feel entitled to control how you dress, who you talk to, access to your passwords, going through your personal belongings, making decisions for your life, and they even feel entitled to telling you how you feel. And this entitlement has this undercurrent of aggression. So if you stand up for yourself, they tend to get really aggressive, threatening, bullying, and this may escalate into a full-blown rage. If you deny the narcissist full access to your entire life, you've basically made yourself a target for their rage. They expect you to be subservient, obedient, compliant, and that's who we need to become in order to survive a relationship with a person who has this sense of entitlement. They have no problem to feeling completely entitled to your resources, your time, you basically dedicating your entire life to being at their beck and call. They simply don't understand or can't hear the word no. Number 6 is interpersonally exploitative. So basically they take advantage of others so they can achieve their own gains. And that will be emotionally, financially, physically. They will do whatever it takes to meet their own needs and their own goals. Regarding being exploitative, they are ruthless in their ability to take advantage of others. They believe that if you're naive enough to believe whatever story they're selling, then your stupidity means you deserve to be exploited. And that sounds really harsh, but I think it sounds familiar to a lot of people who have been in these type of relationships, because they will blame you for your ignorance and you deserve to be taken advantage of. It's not their fault that they're lying to you. It's because you're naive. They take pride in being cunning and devious, and they seek out people who are suggestible, impressionable, unsuspecting, because exploitation is like a game to them. Number 7 is a lack of empathy. So they are unwilling to recognize or even identify with the feelings or needs of others. They cannot put themselves in your shoes. So no matter how desperately exasperated you become at trying to convey how you feel or why you're upset because you've been hurt by their behavior, they'll just stare blankly at you, in silence at best. They might be annoyed and really struggle to understand why you're so sensitive, why you can't get over it, why you won't move on already, or why you're being so overly emotional. So this is all a sign of empathy deficiency, to put it mildly. Empathy means nothing to them but a weakness to be exploited. To further clarify this lack of empathy, a complete lack of empathy would indicate antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy, which many narcissists veer into. Remember that a personality disorder is not something that's clearly defined. A narcissist can also exhibit criteria for other cluster B personality disorders. Unless you know this person's history and you've known them for a while and you've seen them in a variety of contexts and have been able to observe whether their other relationships, friendships, their work are actually healthy relationships, that will give you a better insight. Covert narcissists, for example, do an Oscar-nominating performance of being a good person, a savior, sensitive, your hero, pretending how much they really care. But upon closer inspection, it's just words. These people tend to mimic people's emotions so well they can fake empathy. They're great actors, but are emotionally vacated. And researchers speculate that perhaps they have more of a cold empathy or cognitive empathy, where they're able to think about emotions. So they're able to recognize another person's emotional state and mimic it because it's expected of them. But basically they're faking it. Envy of others and believes that others are envious of them. So there's a sense of competition, that they'll be afraid that others are outdoing them or outsmarting them. They need to be one step ahead. But really underneath that sense of competition is the sense of envy. Because of this undercurrent of envy, this person will actually seek to hurt and destroy others that they believe are envious of them. They're envious of other people's goodness, talents, success. They don't trust anybody, including those closest to them. They are envious of their own children, their adult children's achievements, beauty. If they can sabotage your success, that makes them feel powerful. And they're always suspicious. You feel like you're being watched constantly. There's an unrelenting mistrust, because they're on alert to someone outdoing them. They got to be number one and on top of things. Their mind never rests. It must be exhausting dreaming up of how someone's trying to undermine them. This pathological envy will make them belittle your accomplishments, sabotage your relationships. They'll meddle in your marriage and cause discord, and actually encourage you to be in toxic situations because they know this will dysregulate you. If you're doing too well in your life, it represents that they may be losing control of you. So they'll start minimizing your accomplishments, ignoring your achievements. They'll talk about your dreams in a condescending way because your independence is a threat to their ability to control you, but also because of that pathological envy. Everything you say or do will be questioned. They're skeptical and accusatory. You'll notice how they say that they're happy for you, but only if they can use your achievements as some sort of a trophy. Your successes are only a reflection of them. Sure, they have no problem if they can gain some sort of prestige by being associated with you, if they can benefit from your reputation or abundance, but it's not about you. It's what they can extract from you or what they can gain from being associated with you. They may excessively praise you or flatter you, of course, only in public. But somehow that sourpuss expression on their face gives it away. That look of contempt, that festering envy that bubbles up to the surface, and it's difficult to hide once you've seen it. Number 9 is arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. Regarding this arrogance, you might notice that despite initially appearing humble, nice, and sweet-natured, you'll be shocked when out of nowhere they're talking down to you as if you're mentally deficient. They have no shame telling you straight to your face that they think you're defective. In fact, their arrogance has no limits. They will publicly humiliate you and then very confidently express how someone's going to tell you the truth. This arrogance explains why they have no regard for anyone else's boundaries, why they feel that rules don't apply to them, and why they're above the law. This level of arrogance can cost them their job, their relationships. They simply don't care. They'd rather be right than have peace. This type of arrogance is to the point where they are completely unreasonable and illogical. And words that come to mind are overbearing, authoritarian, stuck up, snobbish, pompous, very proud, and they like to lord it over people. And arrogance is actually based on fear. It's a defense mechanism. So they want to appear knowledgeable or superior, but it's really a cover-up for insecurity and a fear of being perceived as stupid. So I hope that by examining what psychology has to offer us, we can eliminate some of the fear, the drama, which mostly stems from confusion and ignorance. I know my explanations may be biased when it comes to this topic. What I have to offer you is a version of truth, not the entire truth, because it's up to each of us to bring meaning to our experiences. So please continue your own education, do your own research, continue learning from others, both professionals and survivors. because the more perspectives you have access to, the more objectivity you'll gain. And by seeing this subject more analytically and using your critical thinking ability, this will help you gain empowerment and freedom.